Resilient Georgia defines resilience as the ability to overcome adversity. Historical heroes will feature people from the past who cope with setbacks to reach their goals. This is Dawn from the Gwinnett County Public Library, and today, Historical Heroes will spotlight the resilience of Araminta Ross from her childhood to her transformation into Harriet Tubman. In 1822, Araminta Ross was born into the harsh realities of slavery on the plantation of Anthony Thompson in Maryland's Eastern Shore. Minty, as she was called, was the fifth of 9 children born to Ben Ross and Harriet Ritt Green. Ben and Ritt met when Thompson married Ritt's owner, Mary Pattison Brodus, who had been widowed. Their marriage combined their workforce onto the Thompson farm. When Pattison passed away, her son Edward Brodus, from her first marriage, became Ritt's new owner. Children of enslaved mothers belonged to the mother's owner, whether or not their father was free. Around the time Minty was 2 years old, Brodus was old enough to move to the farm he inherited from his father. So he moved Ritt, Minty, and her siblings to live on the Brodus farm in Bucktown, 10 miles away from Ben Ross. Minty's parents tried hard to keep the family relationships as strong as they could despite the distance, but this separation was one of many that would fracture their family and ignite Minty's determination to seek freedom. Minty had to grow up fast, like many slave children, and care for her younger siblings while her mother worked in the big house. However, there wasn't much work on the Brodus farm, so many slaves, including Minty and her older siblings, were hired out to nearby farms or sold further south. Starting at just 6 years old, Minty endured cruel treatment, whippings, and beatings from the people she was hired out to. One of her jobs as a young child was to set muskrat traps in the icy cold marshes with no shoes or warm clothing. Such conditions made her ill, so she would be sent home to get nursed back to health by her mother, only to be hired out again. The grueling work, brutal treatment, and loneliness caused by the separation from her family weighed heavily on Minty. One of her family's worst fears came to fruition in 1825 when 14-year-old Maria Ritty, Minty's second older sister, was purchased by a master in Mississippi, never to be heard from again. As a coping skill against the abuse suffered during her placements away from her family, Minty found ways to rebel against her temporary masters. Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman by Sarah H. Bradford recounts Minty's interaction with Miss Cook. Since Minty was too sickly to continue to help Mr. Cook with muskrat trapping, Miss Cook wanted to teach Minty how to become a weaver. Minty did not like Miss Cook and knew if she learned how to weave, she would have to live in the Cook family home. So she refused to learn until the woman was frustrated enough to send her back to the Brodus farm. In another account that appears in Harriet Tubman, The Road to Freedom by Catherine Clinton, a master Minty was hired out to would whip her nearly every morning, so she started putting on all the extra clothes she had to help deflect the pain. She reacted as if she felt the full effect of the whip, so the master would be none the wiser. A more well-known account of Minty's show of resistance happened sometime in her early teens. On her website, HarrietTubmanBiography.com, historian Kate Clifford Larson documents the incident as taking place when Minty was hired out as a farmhand and had to accompany the plantation's cook on a trip to the Bucktown General Store. There, an overseer from the farm was trying to stop a young slave from escaping, and instead of helping the overseer catch the fleeing young man, Minty stepped in the way. Unfortunately, the overseer had picked up a 2-pound weight to throw at the young man as he fled, but it hit Minty in the head. She received a severe skull fracture, which caused her to suffer from seizures, spells of semi-unconsciousness, and vivid dreamlike visions for the rest of her life. Her faith in a higher power became much stronger after this injury because she believed the vivid visions were messages from God. After her long recovery, during which Brodus tried to sell her many times, but no one wanted an injured slave, Minty was hired out to John T. Stewart, whose land and business brought her in close contact with her father. Strong family and social bonds can set the foundation for resilience when faced with challenges. Minty's ties to her family and community, despite living through the dehumanizing effects of slavery, helped build her resilience into adulthood. The years of 1836 to 1844 were tumultuous for Minty and her family. She started with domestic chores in the Stewart household, but eventually worked her way into the timber yards and the docks nearby her father. Ben Ross was a revered timber inspector for the Thompson plantation. His job involved knowledge of the waterways and working with the free black mariners who moved the lumber up the rivers. The mariners spoke about something called the Underground Railroad, a clandestine network of safe houses and secret routes that led enslaved individuals to freedom in the North. Minty learned from her father and the mariners how to live off the land and navigate the terrain and waterways without being seen. This knowledge foreshadows Harriet's future success as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. During this time, Anthony Thompson dies, and his will frees Ben Ross 4 years later in 1840. A few years after Ross's manumission, cotton was truly king in the Deep South, raising the need for slaves to an all-time high. Maryland's agriculture was experiencing an economic decline due to the rise of cotton, so slave owners took the opportunity to sell off some of their slaves. Again, Minty's family was struck a stunning blow when Brodus sold Minty's sisters, Lena and Soph, to out-of-state slaveholders, never to be seen again. Lena was forced to leave behind her own young children. Reeling from anger, grief, and agony over this unbearable loss, when Brodus also decided to sell Minty's youngest brother, Moses, their mother was determined to keep the rest of her family together. Rit hid Moses among friends and kept deterring Brodus until he eventually gave up. It is around this time that Minty met and married a free black man named John Tubman. She took his surname and changed her first name to Harriet. Changing her first name may have been based on her admiration of Rit's bravery against Brodus. Clinton mentions how deeply anguished Harriet was by the loss of her sisters and the near loss of her brother. Instead of giving in to despair, Harriet investigated a possible route to freedom. Around 1845, Harriet was suspicious of Brodus and hired a lawyer to check for the possible manumission of her mother from her original owner, Atho Pattison, Brodus's great-grandfather. In Bradford's work, Harriet said the lawyer had to look back 65 years for Atho's will, which stated Rit was bequeathed to Mary Pattison until Rit turned the age of 45. Any of her children would also serve Mary Pattison until they turned 45 years of age. Brodus refused to execute this provision of his great-grandfather's will, so Rit remained enslaved and subject to being sold, and so did her children. Harriet was incensed that her mother was denied the freedom she was entitled to, and the fear of being sold further south plagued her. By this time, Harriet reached an understanding with Brodus that allowed her to hire herself out to work on area farms as long as she gave him part of her pay. When he passed away in 1849, Brodus left his wife and the farm deep in debt. Harriet learned that his widow will have to sell off the slaves in order to make ends meet. Now more than ever, Harriet wanted to find a way to freedom for herself and her loved ones. In the fall of 1849, she gets word that she may be sold, so while she and her brothers, Ben and Henry, are working on a farm 40 miles away from home, they make a bid for freedom. Eliza Brodus submitted a runaway ad, which still referred to Harriet as Minty. Since they were not on the Brodus property when they went missing, the runaway ad was not immediately posted. They were able to hide out in the area for several weeks, but fearing capture, they decided to return to the Brodus farm. Soon after returning with her brothers, Harriet made the decision to escape to freedom on her own. According to Clinton, John Tubman did not want to accompany his wife in her bid for freedom. The fear of being sold away from all she knew was too great for her, so she resolved to go alone. This time, she used her knowledge to navigate the land and made connections with those who ran the Underground Railroad. She eventually reached freedom in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Rather than settling into the comfort of her newfound freedom, Tubman found domestic work and saved money to help get her family and friends to freedom. Harriet Tubman's resilience manifested in her ability to plan ahead, set goals, and know when to ask for help. These abilities and her faith were the driving force behind her journey from slavery to freedom and her tireless efforts to liberate others. In 1850, Tubman carried out her first rescue mission when she learned that her niece Keziah was going to be sold, along with her children. With the help of Keziah's free husband, Harriet managed to execute the escape plan and a safe passage to freedom for Keziah and her family. A few months later, Harriet returned to get her youngest brother Moses. Clinton documents that when Harriet next returned in the fall of 1851, she sent word to her husband to meet her and accompany her to the north where they could be together again. She was informed that he was not going to meet up with her and that he had married someone else. She wanted to confront him, but realized his betrayal proved that if he could do without her, she could do the same. Although heartbroken, she decided to make this trip to Maryland meaningful and collected a party of 11 freedom seekers, which included her brother Henry and his fiancée, and led them to freedom in Canada. The 7 building blocks of resilience are competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. Harriet Tubman started developing these qualities from a very young age and put them to use throughout her life. She notably displayed competence, confidence, and control during her rescue missions by using her intimate knowledge of Maryland and her connections with the area's network of the Underground Railroad. She carried a revolver in order to keep freedom seekers safe from animals, slave patrols, and especially anyone willing to risk the lives in the entire group by wanting to turn back. Freedom was important, and she did not want anyone to take that away from the group. Biographical information about Harriet Tubman and her family has been difficult to keep accurate over the years, with frequent embellishments and interpretations leading to misinformation. Bradford's account mentions that Harriet Tubman saved over 300 slaves and leads one to believe that they were from all over the South. Larson documents that between the years of 1850 to 1860, Harriet made about 13 trips back to Maryland to personally ferry 70 individuals, including her parents and friends, to freedom in Philadelphia, upstate New York, or St. Catharines in Ontario, Canada. Her last mission was in 1860 to liberate her sister Rachel and Rachel's children. Unfortunately, her sister passed away the year before, and Rachel's children never arrived at the meeting point. Their absence still remains a mystery to this day. Although Harriet could not personally accompany all who wanted to escape from Maryland's eastern shore, her detailed instructions allowed many to get to freedom on their own using the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman never stopped seeking justice and went on to serve extremely significant roles in the Civil War, became an activist, and continued to be a humanitarian until the day she passed away in 1913. Harriet Tubman's life is a powerful example of extraordinary resilience that can emerge in the face of oppression. Although some stated facts differ among resources, the following titles were used for this program: Harriet Tubman, The Road to Freedom by Catherine Clinton, available through the Gwinnett County Public Library. Bound for the Promised Land, Harriet Tubman, Portrait of an American Hero by Kate Clifford Larson. This title is available for request through Gwinnett County Public Library's Interlibrary Loan Service. Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman by Sarah H. Bradford, and Harriet, The Moses of Her People by Sarah H. Bradford, are both available online through Project Gutenberg. Thank you for watching.